This is the Strong is a Mindset podcast, episode number 214. Have you ever wondered why we keep doing the things we know aren't helping us? Sometimes the hardest habits to change are the ones we understand really well, but keep doing anyway. Let's talk about it. This is the Strong is a Mindset podcast, where you'll learn how to build both a strong body and a strong mind by eating, moving, and thinking. I'm your host, physician, personal trainer, certified health coach, and certified life coach, Carrie Holland. Hey, how are you? What's new? What's good? So, what's good here? Well, summer is most definitely flying by. We just finished swim season for the boys. Now we're gearing up for fall cross-country season, and soon it will be school supply shopping, and I don't even know that I'm quite ready for that. But what else is good here is that today we are going to talk about something that came up after a recent coaching session that I had with a client. And I'm sharing it and making an entire episode about it because I feel like the situation was so relatable and so common, and I think there are some essential take-homes to pull from it. So, one of my clients has been trying really hard to cut back on snacking at work. Specifically, she wanted to stop eating the random pastries that kept showing up at her clinic. And we have talked about this a lot. She has planned various strategies to manage it, including having a more substantial breakfast, bringing her own snacks, getting a drink of water, and all the things. And in addition to the strategery that we talked through, we've also talked through her mindset and how she could talk to herself and manage herself when there were pastries at work that seemed to be calling her name. And she knows that this snacking is one of the biggest hurdles getting in the way of the goals that she's working towards. She is incredibly insightful, and she can tell me what's going on in her brain. And yet, in the middle of all that awareness and strategy and planning, she ate a banana pastry at work. Now, that probably does not sound like much of a story, but here is the interesting part about all of this. She does not even like bananas at all. In fact, she said during numerous coaching sessions that she doesn't like bananas in either their original form or mixed into something. But she ate that banana pastry anyway. And as she was telling me about this, I found myself thinking how fascinating all of this was. So why did she eat it? Why did she eat a pastry that she knew she probably wasn't even going to like, and even though she knew this is going to take her just a little bit farther away from her goals? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because the more I think about that coaching session and my client's story, the more I realize this is not at all about the pastry. In fact, I think every one of us has our own version of the pastry. Maybe yours isn't food. Maybe it's picking up your phone every time you have a spare minute, even though you promised yourself you would spend less time scrolling. Or maybe it's checking your work email after you've already decided you're done for the day. Maybe it's pouring the glass of wine that you told yourself this morning you were not going to have at the end of the day. Maybe it's putting things in your Amazon cart when you're bored. So the behavior itself really doesn't matter. What matters is at the end, we've all had that same moment where we stop and think, why did I just do that? And underneath that question is another question. Why do I keep doing the thing I know is not helping me? And here's what I find so fascinating about that question. If knowledge alone reliably changed our behavior, none of us would struggle for very long. Think about it. Once you learned veggies were healthier than chips, you'd probably eat less chips. Or once you learned exercise was good for you, you'd stop skipping your workouts. Doctors would always eat perfectly. Therapists would never lose their tempers. Financial planners would never overspend. Coaches would never procrastinate. But we all know that is obviously not how people work, right? Most of us, we know quite a bit. We know what we like to change. We know what habits would move us closer to our goals. We've read the books, listened to the podcasts, talked to friends, worked with a therapist or a coach, and we spent years trying to understand ourselves. And despite this, we still end up repeating the same patterns. So maybe information isn't what's missing. Maybe it's not another strategy we're missing. Maybe what's missing is that we haven't identified the real problem yet. And I think that's where things get interesting. So now let's get back to my client. I think this is where coaching gets really interesting because for most people, the conversation would stop right around here. She ate the pastry. You ask why. She answers, because I wanted it. And the conversation is done. Except I don't actually think that's the final answer. Because remember, she doesn't even like bananas. So if I'm coaching her, I'm not interested in accepting the first answer that shows up. I want to dig a little deeper and I want to understand what's really happening. So instead of saying, okay, and just moving on after she tells me she just wanted it, I'd ask her to tell me more or tell me what was happening right before she picked up that pastry. And maybe she'd say, well, everyone else was having one. Okay, that's getting somewhere, but I don't think we've landed yet. Because if that's the case, then now I want to know, why does everyone else having one matter? And maybe then she'd tell me she didn't want to miss out. Or maybe she'd tell me she thought about it all morning. Maybe she'd tell me she'd keep thinking about it if she walked away. Or maybe she'd tell me she didn't want to feel deprived by not having it. I don't know. And honestly, that's the point. Good coaching isn't about assuming we already know the answer. And I say this all the time to my clients, I don't have anyone's answer, but my job is to ask really good questions to help you find your answer. And to do that, you have to be willing to look a little deeper to uncover it. You can't just stop at the surface level answer because there is often way more underneath it. And here's why that even matters. Because your answer to these questions changes what we work on. If this was just about really loving banana pastries and not knowing when to say when, then we'd probably spend our time talking about food. But if what she's really trying to avoid is the feeling of missing out or deprivation or regret or scarcity, then we're not working on pastries anymore. We're working on the feeling. Do you see that? It's subtle, but it's huge. Those are two completely different coaching conversations. And the only way we get there is by asking questions and not stopping at the surface level answer, which is something we often do. And now, before we go any further, I also want to be really clear about something. I am not suggesting that we need to psychoanalyze every pastry you eat. Sometimes you eat the pastry simply because you wanted the pastry. End of story. Not every decision needs a coaching session, okay? But when you find yourself asking, why did I just do that? Or when your explanation doesn't quite fit the facts, like my client eating a banana pastry she doesn't even like, that's usually a clue that there is another layer here worth exploring. Because one of the biggest lessons coaching has taught me is this: every behavior solves a problem. Every single one. That doesn't mean the behavior is helpful, and it doesn't mean every behavior moves us closer to our goals. Really, it just means that in the moment, your brain was doing something it thought was helping you. I want you to really hear that, so I'm going to say it again. In the moment, your brain was doing something it thought was helping you. Maybe scrolling solved boredom, or the extra glass of wine solved the stress of the day. Maybe overworking solved the anxiety of feeling like you weren't doing enough. Maybe my client's pastry solved the discomfort of feeling deprived. Different behaviors, different problems, same principle. Whatever it is, the behavior makes sense once you understand the problem is trying to solve. Your brain is always looking for whatever is going to bring you comfort, and it only cares about the immediate short term. So every cookie you eat, or every glass of wine you drink, or every social media app you scroll, it's in part from your brain trying to make you comfortable in the here and now because it really does not care about tomorrow. And here's why it's important to understand this. It's because so many of us spend lots of energy trying to eliminate the behavior. We tell ourselves things like, I just need more discipline. I need more willpower. I just need to stop doing this. But if we never understand what the behavior is actually doing for us, we're only treating the symptom. We're not getting to the root cause, and we're not addressing the reason it keeps showing up. And that is why behavior change can feel so stinking frustrating. Because if you don't get to the root cause, it becomes like a game of whack-a-mole. You stop one behavior and another one pops up in its place, sometimes in a completely different form. So maybe you cut back on pastries, but then you find yourself scrolling your phone more at night. Or you stop scrolling and now you're staying late at work or reaching for a glass of red just to take the edge off. Because the problem you were trying to solve is still there, and your brain is still looking for relief or certainty or comfort. So the strategy changes, but the problem doesn't. And I think that's where so many of us get stuck. We're trying to get rid of a behavior when what we really need to do is understand the problem beneath it. Because once you understand the problem, then you've got options. Before, all you could do was fight the behavior. But now you can decide how you want to respond to the problem underneath it. You can decide whether there's a better way to solve that problem. Or you may realize that what you're trying to avoid is a feeling that you're actually totally capable of experiencing. And that is a completely different conversation than trying to resist a pastry. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, I'm tracking, this makes sense, but if I understand what my behavior is trying to solve, why do I still keep doing it? And I think that's the money question, because awareness is super valuable. It's hard to change something you don't even recognize, but awareness by itself does not automatically create change. And this happens all the time in coaching. Someone will tell me, I know exactly why I do this. And they're right. They know. They understand their patterns. They can explain them with precision. But then they'll still be confused and wonder, so why am I still doing it? And here's something really important to take home. Insight explains behavior, but it does not interrupt it. Or in other words, understanding that your pastry is about avoiding deprivation doesn't suddenly make deprivation feel comfortable. So just like understanding that people-pleasing is protecting you from guilt does not suddenly make the guilt disappear. And understanding that scrolling is helping you avoid boredom doesn't make that boredom any more enjoyable. The feeling is still there. And that is the part that we often skip over. We think that if we understand ourselves well enough, the behavior should just stop. We think we can intellectualize our way through it, but that is not how change works. Insight shows you what's happening, but practice is what actually changes it. And when I say practice, I don't necessarily mean finding the perfect replacement behavior. Sometimes practice is actually way simpler than that. Sometimes it's just pausing long enough to actually notice what's happening. So that might mean recognizing, okay, I'm feeling left out right now, or I'm feeling deprived, or anxious, or bored. But that pause and recognition is different than automatically reaching for the pastry because that's what your brain has always done in the past. And here's what we're really practicing. And I think this is where people get really confused. So we are not practicing feeling uncomfortable. We're practicing not immediately escaping discomfort. And again, that's subtle, but it is a super important difference. I am not asking you to enjoy feeling deprived, or to love feeling bored, or to become someone who never feels anxious. I'm really just asking whether you can let those feelings be there with you for 30 seconds, or maybe 2 minutes, or long enough to decide what you actually want to do instead of letting your uncomfortable feeling make the decision for you. That is huge, and that is really the key to all of this. You're practicing not immediately escaping discomfort. And that sounds so straightforward, but it is not easy. So maybe today that means walking past the pastry, noticing that part of you really wants it, realizing what you're actually feeling, and waiting long enough to decide whether eating it is really how you want to solve that problem. That is the practice. And that's why change requires repetition. It's not because you're slow to learn or that you need more information. It's because you're teaching your brain that there is another way to solve the problem. And that takes practice and the willingness to sit with an uncomfortable feeling instead of immediately trying to escape it with something you regret after the fact. And here's something else to note. We are not measuring your success by whether you never have another pastry. We're measuring success by whether you're becoming less automatic and more intentional with your decisions. That is the goal here. Not that you never have a pastry, but that when you do have the pastry, you're doing so by choice instead of on autopilot. And I think this leads to a realization that has completely changed the way I look at behavior. Most of us assume that we're working towards one goal. But I don't think that's actually true. I think in many cases, there are two different goals that are both competing for your attention. There's the goal you consciously want, and then there's the goal your brain wants in the moment. So, for example, you might genuinely want to lose weight, but in the moment when you are caught off guard by a pastry, your brain really doesn't care about losing weight anymore. It's just thinking, hey, there's a pastry sitting in front of me and I don't want to feel deprived. Or maybe you've got a goal of saving money. Your brain doesn't care because when it's faced with a really great deal, your brain forgets all about saving money and instead it's thinking, Buying this would feel really good right now. It is such a great deal. How can I afford not to buy it? And none of these goals are bad. They're just different. One goal is focused on the future, and the other is focused on making you feel better right here, right now, with zero regard for the future. And whichever goal is louder in the moment is the one that usually wins out. And I think that's why our behavior can feel so confusing. We say we want one thing, but we keep doing another. And it's not because we're lazy or that we lack discipline, and it's not because we don't know enough. It's really because our brain is trying to solve a different problem than the one we're consciously focused on. And honestly, I actually think that's a much kinder way to look at yourself. Because instead of immediately deciding there is something wrong with you when you do eat the pastry or drink wine or buy the thing you weren't planning to buy, instead, you recognize that your brain is just trying to solve a problem, and that behavior made sense to your brain in that moment. So you stop making your behavior mean that you're a failure, and you start recognizing that your brain is just doing exactly what it has evolved to do. It's trying to protect you from discomfort. And once you understand that, you stop trying to fight the behavior itself and start getting interested in what's going on underneath it. And to me, that is a much more productive way of looking at it, because understanding what's driving your behavior is almost always more useful than criticizing yourself for having it. So, before we wrap up today, I want you to think about your own version of my client's pastry, because chances are it isn't actually a pastry. Maybe yours isn't food. Maybe it's scrolling on your phone when you meant to go to bed. Maybe it's checking your email multiple times. Maybe it's saying yes when you wanted to say no, or putting off the thing you know you need to do. Whatever it is, I'm encouraging you to get curious instead of judgmental. And the next time you catch yourself doing the thing you've been trying to stop, instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" I want you to consider this. If I don't do this thing I usually do, what would be so hard about that? I really love that question, because your answer to that question, if you answer honestly, is going to give you a lot of information, because it gets us underneath the behavior. So maybe if you didn't eat the pastry, you'd have to tolerate the feeling of being deprived. Maybe if you didn't pick up your phone, you'd have to sit with boredom. Maybe if you finally posted that thing online, you'd have to risk being judged. Maybe if you said no, you'd have to let someone else feel disappointed. And none of these are easy feelings. But once you can name them, then you'll see what you actually need to work on. And you may not even know the answer immediately, and that's okay. Sometimes you may have to think about it. Sometimes you'll notice the same pattern 3 or 4 or more times before it clicks. That's fine. That's all part of the process. You don't have to solve this the first time you ask the question. The key is to start asking the question in the first place. And honestly, that is where the real, legit work begins. And I actually think that's really good news, because once you stop fighting the pastry and start understanding what's underneath it, you're finally working on the thing that you can actually change. So maybe this week, instead of trying harder, try getting a little more curious. And the next time you catch yourself reaching for your own version of the banana pastry, pause. Ask yourself what's really going on. Not because you need to analyze every decision you make, but because sometimes the thing you're trying to change isn't actually the thing that needs changing. Maybe you've spent years trying to change the behavior when what really needed your attention was the feeling underneath it. And if that's true, then maybe you're not quite as stuck as you think you are, because the pastry was really never about the pastry. And whatever your version of the pastry happens to be, it probably isn't about that either. And I think that is worth paying attention to, because sometimes the biggest change isn't finally mustering enough willpower to stop doing the thing. Sometimes it's finally understanding why you've been doing it all along. And once you understand that, you finally know where to start. All right? And if you want help with this, let's go. When you coach with me, we don't just work on changing your habits. We figure out what's driving them in the first place so that you're working on the real problem. If you're ready to stop fighting your own version of the pastry and start making changes that actually last, check out my website, send me a message at www.carriehellenmd.com/contact, and let's talk about how coaching can help you build habits that fit your life. All right. Thank you again for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you again next week. Hey, if you want to build muscle but don't know where to start, I've got you covered. Head over to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and download my free guide to help you maximize your strength training. Inside, you'll find the essential exercises for building muscle, plus simple 1, 2, and 3-day workout plans that you can follow with just dumbbells and a bench. You'll also find strength training tips to help you train smarter and see real results. My goal is to help you get strong, and this strength training guide will help you do it. Go to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and check it out. Thank you for listening to the Strong is a Mindset podcast. If you want to learn more about how to build both a strong mind and a strong body by eating, moving, and most importantly, thinking, check out carriehollandmd.com.